Call this meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. Committee of the Whole. Are there any declaration of interest, any interest to declare at this point in time from any counselor? Okay, so next on the agenda, there is no in-camera session this evening and there are no delegations or presentations. So we'll move right forward with staff reports. First report is Administration Report SR-048-22, Visitor Services Agreement with the Town of Gananoque. And the motion is moved by Councillor Gorell and seconded by Councillor Olkey that Committee of the Whole recommends that council authorize the mayor and clerk to enter into an agreement with the Township of Gananoque for the provision of visitor services substantially in the form attached to Administration Report SR-048-22. Discussions on this motion? Go ahead. CAO Donachie is speaking to this, so. Guess we'll have to use the, there you go. Yeah. Excellent. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, if you had a question, I had to answer it otherwise.
Sorry, through you, Your Worship. Through this information, are they, when we go through this, we used to deal with the Chamber of Commerce. Are we promoting all of our businesses?
I know that part of the procurement when this was revisited last year, it was specifically asked to document a number of how many businesses they're going out to. And I know that they do a good job as far as promoting TLTI businesses as well. But Steve, CAO Donachie, I'm not sure if you have additional verification of how many businesses they're helping.
Well, if you don't mind, it seems like it's always recreation and, like places like Glen House, Rockport.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the small businesses?
Can you give an example that you think that they're, because this is based on visitor services, so tourism type businesses that are taking in visitors.
Okay, well, tourism, they come through here to go to Charleston Lake Park. They go to Ivy Lee Park.
Mm-hmm.
And they pass by all the businesses here in the village,
Mm-hmm.
including the grocery store, the liquor store, all these other places. Are we
Promoting those as well?
promoting those?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship, and through you. I think we do the visitor center supports the businesses that will support the tourist trade. But I will take that away and confirm with our friends in Gananoque about other businesses and what they do to give them some visibility through the visitor center. So I'll come back to you with that one.
Okay. I'll recognize Councillor Jameson, then Councillor Mabey.
Just anecdotally, I've had an opportunity, and I appreciate the Deputy Mayor's point, Your Worship. Had the opportunity to chat with a few of the businesses up in the frozen north where I come from. And the ones that are talking to me about that, because I asked them specifically, are finding that they're getting good traffic. But they're also the businesses that are aggressively reaching out to the services that can bring people. So it's a combination of their own efforts and you can guess which businesses are aggressively pursuing these services. And the general feedback has been very positive.
So just to clarify, that there's more uptake for the businesses that are engaging with visitor services that are getting more traffic because there's more back and forth.
Absolutely, because it's always a two-way street in those situations.
Fair. Thanks for the clarification. And go ahead, Councillor Mabey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. as you all are aware, I'm the town crier for Gananoque, so I do a lot of work with the visitor center also. And I have been in there many times when they have been promoting not only the town of Gananoque, but the township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands. And if you look around their establishment, you can see how many people are coming through the facility at any given time during peaks. And as the report that they gave us, I think last month, indicated the numbers. So I have personally been there when they've actually explained about different things in our township and what they can go and see. Do they do them all? Probably not, because again, depending on where that person is going, it would depend on who they target as their potential business that they're going to go through. But also the mayor and some of us were at a recent announcement that which has a new wander program that which actually is something that may promote our area even more through that facility to let people know that there's more things in our community that they can come and visit. So I think, you know, for $14,000, they're doing us a great service because we could not provide that because they've already established a hub that which people are going to get that information. So the more businesses that we have in our area, to answer Deputy Mayor's question, if they touch base with the visitor center, tell them that they've got this to offer, then they can target that for them to continue to grow and help our own community. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, 5.2, Administration Report SR-047-22, Lease Agreement with Victim Services of Leeds and Grenville. And the motion reads, it's moved by Councillor Olkey and seconded by Councillor Burrell, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council authorize the Mayor and Clerk to execute on behalf of the Township a lease with Victim Services of Leeds and Grenville. Discussion on this motion. Go ahead, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. A couple of things when I was reading this, I was kind of wondering about. So the first one would be whether it is, well, again, it's about the light bulbs, tubes, and ballasts. Again, when we get to that point, I know in my own business, we have an electrician that comes and does everything but the tubes. So because of it being a community building, I wouldn't want somebody just haphazardly changing a ballast in that and get electrical shock, right? Then there was 5.01B, that which was, again, talking about electrician, and that's what that one was. Next one was the fire extinguishers, that which as a base building should already be within the facility. So, and we as a township should have an annual, if not monthly, check of those devices. And I think having a tenant look after that, we may not have the adequate coverage within the building in any given time, and they may not check it as adequately as we would or our staff would. So I think that may need to be changed if you think so. And is that area currently being used by the archive and at this moment? I thought that's the area that they were going to. So, and this states that it was starting in March. So
Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I will check into the clauses with respect to the electrical stuff and all that to make sure that we're adequately covered and we're not putting them at an undue expense or risk. With respect to the occupancy of the space, it was used temporarily for the archive student to catalog and do whatever it was that she was doing. There was archived material over there that since has been, we're in the process. I think we've got it all moved out, or it's close to being moved out. And we had initially started this with March because they wanted to get in and start doing some fit ups that they wanted to do. But obviously they're not taking possession of the property until we've got the lease signed. So.
Okay. Any further comments? Go ahead, Councillor Burrell.
Excuse me, through you, Your Worship. With respect to Councillor Maybe's issues regarding electricians, when we look at the broader picture, are we, is there additional liability being taken on by the township through this agreement?
Well, they'll be required to have their own insurance in place, but we have, as the owners of the building, we have our commercial general liability insurance and our property insurance over it. So this is just a tenant scenario. So you know, they're responsible for their own contents and all that sort of thing if something happens to the building. But it really is just, yeah, there's additional traffic coming in and out of the building because they'll be in there when they're seeing clients. But you know, it's not going to be a substantial amount of increased volume.
And just with a follow-up regarding any potential renovation, what would we do after 2 years? I assume we could carry on, or we could evict if we, as a township, were renovating that building, as we've talked about for the last 4 years.
Yep.
And I did remember a very fine presentation by this group to council, and they deserve our support. Or is this something we are just trying to reach out and start a foot in the door? Thank you.
So Victim Services approached us in 2021 looking for a satellite office. They currently have some space working out of the OPP detachment in Brockville and another police station somewhere in the area. And they were hoping to get something for a non-police present space. They deal with people who are victims of crime, and sometimes I think being in a police station could be a triggering event for them. So they were really quite interested when they reached out to us of if we had some available space. One Jesse seemed to be the natural fit since we have no immediate plans for the space. If something were to change, we could approach them, and I think they'd be happy if we can provide them with some suitable space somewhere in the township that we could accommodate if we had to close One Jesse and, you know, we're building a new facility or something like that. So I guess the short answer is we'll work something out with them to keep them presence in our township, because they provide important supports to victims of crime and other disasters. So.
Any further comments or questions in regards to the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and we're carried. Just to point the comments that have already been made, but this is a very important service, and I'm very pleased that our township has been one of the locations that has been selected for a remote service, because one of the main things that often gets brought up at county is that many of these services are centralized in Brockville or Gananoque, and maybe not in some of the rural centers. So having an office in Lansdowne, which is available for all of the township, but is kind of out of the way, and you know, somebody walking into the community building is just somebody walking into the community building. They could be going to the library for all that anybody would know. So it's not like it's destigmatizing, I guess is the best way of putting it. And as stated, it's a very important service. So next item on the agenda is Fire Services Report SR-05022 preliminary costing and design for Fire Station 2. Motion is moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Gorell, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council support the preliminary spatial requirements and the financial estimates, and authorize staff to proceed with design of a new new Fire Station 2 in Sealy's Bay. So questions for the chief? If you want to, do you just want to entertain questions?
Take questions first.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead. Councillor, maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. So some of the things I get involved with this type of thing also at my work. So one thing that's always missed are the small things that are needed for a building. And, you know, just some of them that come, you know, some of the soft needs, as I call it, the communications, the tower, the septic tank, which is probably included, but let's say the paper towel dispenser, the mirrors on the walls, you know, even the towel bars sometimes are forgotten in these designs. So one of my big things is, and I wouldn't mind being part of it if you want me to, if you so wish, to actually maybe see the plans at some point, because the last big build we had, I did point out a couple things, and they disregarded them, and they've come back and said they should have done them. So I have a little bit of background. So I'd like to, if council wishes, I will offer my services. The other point that I was wanting to know is, we're going to be moving out of a fire hall now. Is there any plan or any money or anything being set aside to retrofit that into more of a community services, the lower floor for Sealy's Bay or an open market or something? I know it's part of a separate entity in this, but maybe at this point it needs to be talked about to put it in the budget for next year when the hall is vacated for fire services, but can be retrofitted for the community to have a better community hall. And believe it or not, that's all my questions.
Go ahead, Chief.
Through your worship, yes, Councillor, maybe absolutely. We've talked a little bit about how we set that committee up. My background as well is renovations and construction, so I'm very interested to see what type of design they come up with. But absolutely, I think it'd be very important to have a couple of people from council or a couple of council members and Director of Public Works help with that as well. Mr. Halliday, help me with that as well. Absolutely, I think that's a great plan. As far as the community building or the old fire hall, there has been some talk about that. It was actually brought up in an email from one of the councillors saying possibility of including some glass doors in the budget to kind of move that in that direction when it comes to that point. But that would certainly be something we'd be looking at.
Councillor Gorell.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. As I read this, really the one area that concerns me, and it is finance. And this would be, I guess, my questions would go to our treasurer. What we're being asked here is to, number one, and this isn't the treasurer's issue, but we're being asked to accept a design of 9,500 square feet. We're secondly being asked to accept the design cost estimated. And thirdly, proceed with the design of said building. So I have so many issues about this that I want to just start and say, number one, the design has already been covered by $400,000 in the 2022 budget as a potential debt item. The accepted design cost could be off by hundreds of dollars per square foot. The accepted design suggests 9,500 square feet, where when I do the arithmetic, excluding a mezzanine, I suppose, is 8,430 square feet, which would at $300 a square foot come in at 2.5 million rather than 3. So it appears to me, for what we're being asked too much this evening. What we perhaps could to talk about is acceptance of that design and have the professionals design something and come up with some more, what I would believe, accurate cost estimates. I would not be willing to pass this as written next week. It should be amended. And so what would I ask of finance? The 2022 budget clearly states that we potentially have the fire hall, the Ivy Lee dock, a fire truck. All of those items are in the capital budget as possible and probable debt items. The document before me says that the municipality has a debt limit. So by proceeding with this, what we have done is essentially handcuffed ourselves to a single debt. And that would leave the other items from the 2022 budget out in the cold. So what I would propose is that we have a fuller discussion or a written report on how this township expects to handle that. It's in the budget. It's anticipated to be debt, but there's nothing in this report that deals with that. That is not a fire issue. That is a budget issue. So that would be my main one. And I'm pretty skeptical of the way that it's just presented that it's so much a square foot. I think I'd like a better detailed design of that, as was perhaps given by the Ivy League dock. I know that was a lot of money. So those items are very, very concerning to me. The idea of the fire hall is great, necessary. We're aware of that. It's just that we seem to be getting ahead of our skis here. So on that, I'm just going to pause here for a minute and see what finance might have to say. Thank you.
I might actually defer to Director of Operations who is involved in the costing and stuff, and then we'll go to Kate after that in regards to the debt and stuff, if that's okay.
Thank you. Through your worship, in terms of the report that's in front of you, we gave a cost estimate based on the fire halls that we visited. And that's the best estimate that we have at this point until we get into detailed design. Once we get into detailed design, we will give you those cost estimates of all of the individual pieces of that. What we're looking at right now is what we feel should be in the fire hall, the rooms that we've seen, the clean rooms, the training center, the kitchen, the garage, trying to get an idea of the square footage, what we should be building this for, and then giving you our best estimate of what those costs are. So that's what this report is. We'd like to move forward with the design, the detailed design, where we would get those costs, but we're bringing it back here first for a discussion before we proceed with that step. So we're not looking to tie the township to the construction of a fire hall right now. We're simply looking to start the design process so that we're not looking 3 years out for this hall to be built. We're looking to complete the design within 2022 so that we can construct it within 2023.
Okay. So the approval isn't for the top end amount, it's for the design. But the report is speaking to debt, which I'll ask the director, the treasurer to speak to the debt piece, the question that Councillor Gorell had.
Thank you, through your worship. So as the report indicates, that we do have a limit that's prepared, that's calculated by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and the current limit is $3 million. That's how much we can spend a year in debt repayments. That's not the total money we can borrow. That's how much we can spend on our repayments of debt we've already incurred. So we're looking at a loan we currently have, which is $67,000 a year in payments. So we have 2.9 million remaining in annual debt repayment limit. And the estimated, which obviously is just an estimate right now, repayment for this type of loan for this facility that we're looking at right now is 173,000. So that's the 173 is what would come off the 2.9 million in terms of our annual debt limit.
Councillor Gorell.
Thank you very much for that, Kate. So if I heard you correctly, that $3 million isn't the total incurred debt. That is a yearly repayment amount.
That's correct.
So we could assume $7 million in debt.
Yeah,
Is that
I mean,
correct?
yes, through your worship. So, I mean, because when municipalities borrow, there's varying lengths of debentures issued, there's varying terms and interest and so on. So what the provinces does is this is 3 million that we can have total to repay debt in 1 year. And as treasurer, I would not actually recommend we even get close to the 3 million. Right now we're at 67,000 a year and our limit's 3 million. So I mean, we have very little debt obviously right now, but when looking at the $3 million limit, the reference would be to the $173,000 per year that this loan we anticipate as an estimate over 30 years, it would cost $173,000 a year to repay it.
If I may, and I probably sound like I'm beating a horse here. So that does not preclude us from having other issues. We have the Springfield House, we have a fire truck, we have Ivy Lee Dock, and Lord knows what's going to happen with 1 Jesse Street over the course of 50 years. So this township could, if necessary, incur other debt. Am I correct in saying that? And I guess I'm going to add a second thing. When we're talking about that amortization, and you mentioned 3% over a bunch of years, given that the Bank of Canada is probably going to be pushing some rates up, how reliable a number is that? I mean, that thing could go to 5% unless there's something I don't know about municipal financing. And I do see that lower tier governments are not allowed to issue debentures in the Municipal Act. So when we say we're borrowing from Infrastructure Ontario, is that our sole source or our best source or only source of money? And is that interest rate fixed? Whatever it is it fixed over the full amortization period? Thank you.
Through your worship. So yes, to your first question, we can definitely borrow additional money beyond what we're contemplating in this report. As far as Infrastructure Ontario is one authority we could borrow through, we probably would go to market, which would mean like we'd go and ask 2 or 3 banks for their rates. However, Infrastructure Ontario typically has the best rates for borrowing this type of money. The interest rate for Infrastructure Ontario would be set for the entire term of the loan. So like if we got 3%, that would be 3% for the full year, 30 years. However, if we went with a bank, we wouldn't be able to lock it in. As far as I'm aware, from my past experience, it's typically not locked in for the complete term of the loan. We're not tied to using Infrastructure Ontario, but it is generally one of the best options for municipalities to borrow money from.
In your, just one final, I guess, in your experience, Kate, that 3%, when you look at the prime and everything setting to climb in an unprecedented fashion coming up, what's the reliability of that 3%? Thank you.
Through your worship. So, I mean, the 3% is our best estimate with today's information. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't feel confident in trying to predict what the interest rates are going to do. So yes, there's obviously risk around that estimate being something that will change and increase over the coming year or two or whenever. But again, if we get it locked in with Infrastructure Ontario, it would be stable in the fact we would know it would be that rate over the term of the loan. But you're right, there is obviously risk there.
Can I ask a question? So just, it's in the vein of Councillor Grell's question, having to deal with interest rates every day. The prime lending rate has gone up recently, but they anticipate one more rise, if not 2. So I do understand the question that Councillor Grell has. Having said that, Infrastructure Ontario, I believe their rates earlier this year were considerably lower than mortgage rates that I deal with. In fact, I want to say that Infrastructure Ontario was lending at like 2, or even at one point, even in the last year and a bit, it was less than 2%. And that was locked in. So I think Director Tyndall, if possible, if you could look at what they would be charging for interest as of today's date, because nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody can predict interest rates, in which case I would have retired long before now. But I think it would be interesting for council to know what today's interest rate is for Infrastructure Ontario, and I could be way off. But I think it might speak to the question of the 3% estimate, depending on what today's interest rate is. Okay, so I'm going to recognize Councillor Jameson, then I'll recognize Councillor Maybe.
I guess I'm concerned that we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. All the points that have been made are worthwhile. What we're being asked to do here, and if I'm reading this correctly, is to support the preliminary spatial requirements. In other words, we're just looking at a concept and asking the staff to move to next steps. A lot of the discussion about what the interest rates are going to be. I mean, I fooled around with some numbers at 3 million at 5%. And it still doesn't drive us out of business over 30 years. So my feeling is that this stage, we just really are being asked to give them permission to move to the next step. And at the rate we're going, I suspect we're not going to look at it until the 2023 budget anyway. And that could end up being the case with the Ivy Lee dock, which is another thing that we need to do. And I say need to do, I should be cautious. I don't think there is an argument about doing these things, the fire hall and the Ivy Lee. It's just a question of how we manage the means that we have to pursue it. But at this stage, I'd really like to see us support this next step, which is all we're being asked to do as far, unless somebody can correct me on that. Thank you, Your Worship.
And before I go to Councillor Maybe, one other point of clarity that Councillor Gorell brought up that I would like the Director Tyndall to speak to, the 400,000 that was discussed, that was put aside in this year's budget, does that cover design costs? I guess that maybe it's supposed to, and it's already been approved in the existing budget.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. So I just want, I didn't know if, I didn't want it to be confused that there was more money being asked for here.
But we
for
wanted
design.
to include the full project all encompassing when we gave you the numbers. So that we were looking at the big picture, not just the construction costs. We're looking at the land acquisition, we're looking at the design, and we're looking at the construction and contract administration as one big project. So we know exactly at the end of the day, what we signed up for.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Maybe, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. And yes, without a plan, we don't know when or what it's going to cost us, no matter what. So we've got to get the plan done. We got to sign off on it so we know that we can get a quote for it and move forward. But going back to Councillor Gorell's, we know we have a dock, we know we have a fire truck, and we know we have the building. So maybe Director of Finance can actually work out all those to give us a total of what our debt's going to be over the next 30 years because of those three. And that would probably solve a lot of our issues. Thank you.
Just to also be clear, we don't have to take it all in debt. We do have reserves that we can add to it and not take as much in debt, just to add that extra piece.
Sure.
Um,
And there may be opportunities for grant funding as well as we're going through this process that we would apply for.
And we know that there's already grant funding in process for Springfield House and what have you. So, okay, go ahead, Councillor Gorell.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate that then this report, although all that information as dated as it may be, is in there just for interest's sake. It really is non-bearing. If we're in agreement with that around this table, then that takes us to the design. And just to ask, I don't think there's too much argument with what we see there from our tour of the 2 fire stations. But I did notice that my square footage came up with 8430 square feet, which means the differential could be the mezzanine. Because you guys had mentioned about 9,500 square feet. And that's a $500,000 difference.
Through your worship, there was, so we picked out the 10 most important parts. That doesn't include like mechanical rooms,
Stuff like that.
smaller spots like that. So we took the 10 most important parts
I see.
for that building and put those in. So
Okay.
So storage closets. all
storage
of those
closet,
things.
mezz or
Yeah.
front foyer, entranceway.
So then to be clear, if we were proceeding with the design phase, that would be an RFP. And we would say, this is what we want. Is that what we're doing? And then we would really be looking at construction type, wood, steel, whatever. Not putting polymer on the floors, that kind of thing. Is this, so is that the wise thing to do when we're looking at design? Do we want to say this is precisely what we want, or do we want to allow for a little more flexibility in that design and reporting back? I'm not sure how that would work. That's pretty explicit what we've asked for there. So I'm not familiar with the process. Thank you.
I'm going to recognize Councillor Jameson before the director's answer.
I agree with Councillor Gorell, Your Worship, with respect to some aspects of this, but I still look upon this report as more of a roadmap than a blueprint. So the direction is where we're probably going to go, but the specifics as to, who's on first, et cetera, aren't there. And we all know that. But I think it's incumbent upon us to give them the direction to move to that next stage, because we're a long way from raising our hands and approving a design and a budget and an outcome and a debt. We're a long way from that.
If I may.
Yep.
And I apologize for speaking so much here. That's great. And I agree with that 100%. It is the first step. So I don't want to handcuff the design team. That's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
If we're too specific and saying 9,500 square feet, give or take. And we're specific, well, then they're going to go, okay, well, here we go. It strikes me that they might have some ideas that, and if we were a little broader, I don't know how to do that. I really don't know how to accomplish when we're asking a design team. That's where I'm going with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Through
Director.
your worship, when we select a consultant for doing the design for us, we'll be looking at their history. Have they designed similar halls? Reach out to the other municipalities and get their feedback on it. And just in our tour alone, we saw a lot of differences between one hall and another, where some would put epoxy on the floor and others would put down the laminate flooring. Life expectancy of one versus the other has a substantial different. One will extend the life of the facility. It'll last longer. It may cost more upfront, but we'll let the consultant guide us with those decisions. There are other things like what materials we're going to use. Are we going to be flat roof? Are we going to be a steel roof? Are we going to be putting the infrastructure in place for future solar panels? Are we going to have underground storage? All of those things kind of work their way out in the design phase. It's what's the shell that we're looking for? What rooms do we want to include? And we give that to them. And then at that point, once we've determined the areas, then we start looking at what our finishes are. What level of investment do we want to make? What things can we live with and what things can we live without? What are the wants versus the needs? That's all part of the detailed design phase. So we go through the initial phase, they give us the layout, see how it fits on the property and all the approvals and those types of things. And then once we've nailed that down, then we dive into what it's going to look like and what finishes we're going to have. It's quite variable from stage one to the final stage. There's a lot of options, a lot of decisions we're going to have to make, and we're not going to make that ourselves.
Any
Thank you
further?
very much. And that's what I want to hear. Thank you.
Perfect. Any further comments or questions in regards to the motion that's at hand? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? And we're carried. Thank you. Okay, next on the docket, 5.4 Fire Services Report SR-04922. I should have said this at the beginning of the meeting. There's two things I totally forgot. Councillor Fody gave his regrets and is unable to join us this evening. And if there is anybody on the call that would like to ask a question, if you could please put your question in the Q&A so it'll alert the clerk and we'll recognize you at that time. So next on the docket is 5.4 Fire Service Report SR-04922. And the motion reads, moved by Councillor Maybe, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the allocation of municipal modernization funding to purchase it's 16, not 19, and the director will speak to that in his report. Bell APX 6000 P25 VHF portable radios via a single source procurement. So I will recognize the director to bring us up to speed in the change from 19 to 16. Sorry, Fire Chief, Director. Sorry, Director of Fire Services in my mind.
Be your worship. Yes, this came up on Friday. I got a phone call from a very distressed salesperson through Bell that was quite upset because they had made a large mistake on their estimate on or their quote on their radios. So we've had to drop 3 radios off that. We're looking at going through the modernization funding on this. And the radios that we're trying to use, they are not the best in the system, but they work the best for us. We've had a couple of different trials and errors on things. The one I currently use is it's actually Motorola APX 6000 P25. So these type of radios actually have a repeater built into the radio. So when we go to transmit, because our topography, if we have certain places in the township that we can't get the message out, that repeater and that radio finds the closest tower, which is different than pretty well all the other radios that we tried out. They didn't have that repeater system within them. So that's why the cost is so high. But they certainly regretted their mistake on that. So we're looking to bring these radios into service because The current radios we have were all purchased, approximately 40 of them, approximately 8 to 10 years ago, when the county did a big purchase and changed the whole radio system over. I spoke with Bell again today, and they've assured me that with Next Gen 911, the enhancements to that, these radios will cover and will function within that as well. The current radios are, we can't even get parts for them anymore. So what we'll do is the current radios we have, they'll go on the trucks. And as they start to die, we'll buy more just to start to replenish the service with radios.
Fair enough. And again, that this is being purchased through the remaining modernization funding.
Modernization.
Correct. Okay, I'll recognize Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Maybe.
Through you, your worship, to our chief, are we working at all with Alex Bay, Clayton, with radio? Can we communicate with those folks for our islanders?
Through your worship, no. Currently, Brockville, they basically go on the phone system back and forth by phone, but we don't have any radio communications with them at this time.
Go ahead.
Sorry, is there an idea that we could exchange radios so that we have communication?
Through your worship, we can use the VHF radios as far as like channel through the Coast Guard radios. They can talk back and forth through those if need be. But most of our dispatching we just do through Brockville. They speak right to their dispatch, which radios back and forth with them. But certainly something we can look at.
10-4.
Okay, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So the range of these radios is how much, Chief?
So I can speak to Brockville, or sorry, through your worship, I can speak to Brockville anywhere in the county or in the town, well, anywhere in the county with these radios, because they pick up towers, but they've got their own repeater system within them to help with that.
As everybody who has one. And to that end, where are they typically positioned, all the radios? Because you have 40 and you're going to get 16 more. And I know that there's some that don't work properly or going to be taken out of service. So who actually gets a radio within the fire service?
So through your worship, all of the officers carry a portable radio with them all the time in their own personal vehicles, and they bring them to fire calls and training. And then the remainder sit in the pumpers and the tankers and the support units as well. So in a perfect world, I'd love to be able to say we'll have a portable radio for everybody, but that's not feasible at this time. But as a safety, we make sure we have people as they enter into a structure, into any instant, they have at least their team has at least one radio with them. So the remainder of them stay on the trucks.
Yep.
Until
And as a follow-up, if I
Go
could.
ahead.
Along the line of Deputy Mayor, is the communication within our immediate communities around us. And I know I touched on this last time, but again, you mentioned about Brockville being kind of the central hub where information is sent out. But can we talk to Kingston? Can we talk to the next borough north and Front of Young and those other ones that are around us with this equipment, or is it all still through Brockville?
Through your worship, yes, we speak through Brockville is our main communication, but we can speak to anybody within our Leeds-Grenville fire system on the same channel. Half the county's on Leeds, half the county's on Grenville. So it's just a matter of flipping the switch over on the channel. Gananoque has their own radio base, and we also can speak with them, and they can, when they do mutual aid or automatic aid with us, they also switch to that. Kingston talks directly to Brockville through their dispatching, and then they relay the information because their digital system's just that little bit different than ours on their trunking. So,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Mike, I did a little research on not just radios, but because I was in aviation, I do understand the need for upgrades and good communication. And apparently, and I want to tie this into the broader picture here, and you may support what I'm about to say. In 2019, the Ontario government investing $765 million to build, quote, the new public safety radio network. That is a big deal. Ontario has, by what I read here, the biggest public safety radio network in North America. And it's actually a North American-wide deal. So in answer to questions like, can you communicate with a service in the United States? It is possible. I do not understand the ins and outs of this, but it apparently the entire infrastructure is being rebuilt in Ontario with that $765 million. And it's to take place up to and including 2023. So the standard to which this, and this is not a cellular program, okay? This is not cellular towers. They may use the towers, but it's almost more a repeater system. So it's a system within itself. It's a good read because we're obviously going to be investing a lot of money in this down what we're being asked tonight and down the road, I would assume. So the Ontario government looks like to me that they gave the project to Bell Mobility. And this is where my questions start coming up. So Bell Mobility actually, in my understanding, works with Motorola. So all of these radios are Motorola solutions with the Bell Mobility contract or whatever. When I looked on their site for available radios, there are dozens of them. When I look, and by the way, one of the things that makes these expensive, I guess, or special, is they fall under what is called the P25 Design Criteria, which is a criterion established for that North American public safety radio network. So, I mean, it's frightening to see these radios worth this kind of money, and I'm not sure that's where we want to go. But that is the broad umbrella of what these radios do. So there's a number of them. Right in front of me here, I have, and this is all just from the Bell Group and the Motorola. There are other suppliers here. There's a lot of them actually, and they are all capable of the P25 mode of communication, which is a little bit complex to understand, I must say. But it's for land mobile radio systems supported by the Motorola Group and others. So when we're dealing, and this is what one question, when we're dealing with the Bell radio that you're asking for, is it because we are obligated to deal with Bell on this through the Ontario program? Or is it just Bell seems to be, where did we come up with Bell? And of all the radios I'm looking at here, they got the APX 8000 right down to the, right down to about the APX 1000. And when APX comes up on that, it seems to me to indicate that they are P25 capable, which is a big deal. And therefore, how did we arrive at the APX 6000? And is it the APX 6000 or 6000 XE? Because that XE is the one for fire and rescue teams. The 6000, for instance, says law enforcement agencies and so on. And I would feel more comfortable. If I had a broader range here. We're jumping into the APX. Now it's coming in at what, $6,500 a radio?
Mm-hmm.
Probably.
Yep.
So, and if we're only doing half, we're going to be looking at $250,000 in radios shortly. One last item. There were 3 radios in the budget for 2022. There were 3 radios on a line item for $25,000. Have they been purchased?
Through your worship, to answer your last question, I'll answer that
Yeah.
first. My original plan was I had got a decent price and I could buy 5 radios with that money. So that was how, but I've got 4 radios I can buy with that 25,000 plus this, which will give me, now I will end up with 20 radios at the end of this. Is the way we're going to do that. But then when we noticed that we had when we talked with the financial end of department, we had this money in modernization, and because the radios are starting to fail, because I had tried out a couple of other radios just to see, we ended up adding them together to purchase.
Did we try other vendors, or were these Motorola units that we tried out?
So through your worship, the Motorola APX 6000 PE model, the fire rescue one, is another $1,100 on top of that because of it's the case that it's in, which is to resist heat. We have our radios in pouches under our coats. And if it gets hot enough to melt those, then we shouldn't be in there. That's kind of the way we were looking at it. So the radio I currently use is the APX 6000, and it served me well. That's why we went with that one in particular. The reason that we looked at Bell was because originally it was Tortoise Communications, and then Glentel took over, and then Bell took over. So they already work with Brockville Fire and Leeds Grenville Fire Services. And they've been doing all the services throughout all of so that's why we went. They have the programming already in line. So it's just a matter of flipping the new radios over with the channels. So that's why I originally went.
So could we investigate, is the reason that these other groups are using Bell is because of this rebuild of the Public Safety Communication Service? And it is a Bell mobility program sponsored by the Ontario government. And is there any money from the Ontario government to help municipalities like ours invest in this very expensive technology? Is there money there? Like, it seems we need to do a little more homework here because they're so expensive. And I would anticipate $250,000 in the next year or so that we're going to spend on this. So without beating this horse to death, if Bell was the thing, so we have the cost, are there service agreements? Are there ongoing costs? Because these radios are upgradable to meet the P25 as I read. So that would incur a cost, I'm sure, with service agreements. So the initial cost may be, I'd like to know a little more information about what exactly is Bell selling us here, because they are the #1 and selected vendor, it appears to me, from the Ontario government. I'd like more information. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Councillor Olkey, and then I might have a solution to this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, Chief, I think you answered the question I would have. You use the radio you have because it's the most rugged for your conditions of service. And that's really I do have some experience with radios in operational environments. And the thing is, you want one that actually works the way you want it to work. It may cost a little more. There may be other systems out there that are fancier and have bells and whistles. But if you found a solution that works, that would be good enough for me. Thank you.
Through your worship, I did speak with Bell today as well. And yes, as next gen 911 comes, all radios will have some sort of an upgrade on the license that will have to happen. But it won't matter what radio system we use. They'll in those times, there'll have to be some sort of a licensing upgrade on those for just about every radio. To your question of whether there's monies available, this is the county-wide price through Bell. So any fire department within Leeds Grenville County would have this price as well. There are other fire departments that are using some of the other radios that I have tried, and they're having good luck with them. We do not, based on our topography and the actual type of radio we use. Where we are, when we tried it, we had a fire call out on County Road 32. I was standing beside the commanding officer, and I was hearing the transmissions with Brockville, and he wasn't on this other trial radio. So we've tried a couple of different ways to rectify that. It's all based on the repeater that's within these radios. And the original radios that we got, the 40 of, they worked very well for the time, but they were almost obsolete when they came into service. These guys look like they've progressed, and they seem to be following the lines of what they're looking to do with Motorola on those. So,
excuse me, one last question. Did we test any other Motorola products?
Through your worship,
or were they other vendors?
Through your worship, I did not try any other Motorola ones because we've had good luck with the one that was bought before I came.
Okay.
And that was this is where the APX 6000 came in. That
Okay.
was the pricing I got
Mhm.
based on what
Okay.
we've been using for 3 years on that one.
Okay, also, I would just add that in future, we would probably be the municipal modernization funding, I believe that there's another iteration of that funding that's available at this point in time. I'd have to double check with the treasurer. So if we needed further funding for more radios down the road, to your point, Councillor Gorell, about $250,000 worth of radios, we could potentially apply for those modernization funds yet again. This is to exhaust the municipal modernization funding that we still have on hand that hasn't yet to be used. Director Tyndall, do you know if there's further modernization funding still available right now?
Through your worship, I'm actually not aware of any other intakes. I haven't heard any word on any other intakes coming open, but I mean, the way they've talked about them in the past, it implied there would be further ones, but currently I'm not aware of any further intakes.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go ahead.
Through your worship, one of the reasons I did this was because I know that ours are nearing end of life and I'm trying to catch up for what hasn't been spent on these radios over the years. We should have been over the last 5 to 7 years replacing 2 and 3 at a time, just to be prepared. So by replacing this 20, getting this in here, I don't need to come back to council next year to say, I need 10 more, I need this many more. I can put that into my capital budgeting every year now and replace 2 to 3 over the next period of time to get me to where we need to be replacing all the remaining.
Also to make the point that I believe during the fraud that happened here in the fire service 4 or 5 years ago, I
Mhm.
believe some radios went missing at that particular time, or there was some, I know you weren't here at that point in time. I know there was a transaction with another area that some radios were included in. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're short on radios to begin with, and not to make a joke about that, but at the same time, I appreciate the attention to detail and the inventory that we have or don't have at this point in time. So I'm going to recognize Councillor Jameson.
Yeah, to the extent that I kind of agree with everything I'm hearing, even though I hear certain conflicting messages, but I just like to thank Councillor Gorell for the work he's done on that. He deserves his nickname, the Digger, because he'll go the extra mile, and I appreciate that. At the same time, you raise the issue of the fraud, you raise the issue that we're really behind on a whole bunch of things. And this is just one example. So we suddenly start getting hit with this expense and that expense and everything else. But if there had been a proper planning and delivery approach to how the township was running over the last decade, then we wouldn't be sitting here looking at some of these big ticket items that scare us all to some extent, and rightly so. So I'd like to thank Councillor Gorell, but I do appreciate the time and energy that staff's put into this issue. Thank you.
Follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I'm just on a site here, the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs site, and they're talking about public safety radio channels encryption, because apparently the police services would use similar radios, and I'm hoping the OPP down here use these radios. And I guess I would expect that communication is fulsome amongst all the services, Mike, the police and everybody, because this is suggesting that the OPP is actually going to encrypted channels so that your police scanner doesn't work anymore, I assume. And part of the P25 thing is that encryption. So are these radios encrypted? Is that a possibility for the next 10, 15 years? And the idea of security of these radios, who is responsible for them? Because with the encryption, what they can do is shut off individual radios. They can make them useless pretty quick. So, but who's responsible for a $6,000 piece of equipment in somebody's pocket?
Through your worship, as far as the encryption, at this time, Kingston was encrypted. They went to a higher trunking band, so it was much harder to be able to listen to their calls. Currently, Brockville or Leeds Grenville do not encrypt their transmissions. Police do, Gananoque Police does, as well as OPP, but fire at this time doesn't. I'm sure that that will come eventually, but at this time, that's not something that we do. As far as who's responsible, each officer is responsible for the items that we give them. They get almost $7,000 worth of gear before they get a radio. They're responsible for their bunker gear, their boots, their helmets, their flash hoods, pagers, like everything we have, unfortunately, is expensive in fire.
Sure.
As far as the radio goes, they get issued a radio, and it's their job to make sure it's charged, batteries are up to date, and that. And then when they leave, those radios get handed back in. The ones that sit on the trucks, they get checked on truck checks. They get checked after calls to make sure that they're all in working order, and all of our fire halls are secured.
So an individual is responsible for each of those units.
Every officer that has one is
Yep.
responsible for his
Okay.
or her portable radio, as
All
well
right.
as all their PPE.
And they have agreements that there's, when they sign up here, that there's expectations
Yes,
of behavior
absolutely.
and responsibility with the gear.
Yeah, and they literally get read the riot act, especially with portable radios, because that's something we can't, we don't want to lose those. That's the most important part on any fire scene is communications.
And safety of the volunteer firefighter who's giving their time as well.
So just if I may, so we're either going to say yes to this, or we're going to say, could we do a little more homework in the model? But if you are telling this council that is the model, and you're very happy with it, because there's a raft of information here that I've read that you could almost have a consultant consult on all that. So I'd be curious personally to know about the other radios and what they do and don't do. And if encryption isn't an issue, then is there another radio that does the job? Thanks. I'll leave it at that, and then maybe we'll just put it to a vote.
Go ahead.
Through your worship, absolutely. There's various levels of radios all over. The one that I looked at that through Motorola is the one that I've used, and I've had nothing but good luck with that. So that was the reason we went with that. It's not the highest end. It's not the lowest end. It's what works well for us everywhere in the county, because I've been all over the township, because I've been pretty well everywhere in the last 3 years. So it's worked well for me.
Also, Mike, I'm sorry to keep going, but we're early. Do we need base station radios in our 4 fire stations as well? And are they capable right now of dealing with these radios, or do we need these upgrades as well?
Through your worship, currently, like we didn't have to change anything when we went to my radio. With next gen 911, I'm sure there'll be upgrades to all the radios. They're saying in the county-wide service, as far as fire goes, there'll be an upgrade to the complete dispatching system, as well as probably all the radios. But using these radios, we fall in line with a little bit different licensing possibly, but we're compatible to move to the next steps of next gen 911. Because with next gen 911, there's also the data parts where when the call taker takes a call for 911, the person can have their cell phone and take a video of what's happening with that. And Brockville now currently has part of the programming that they can pass that on. There was some dispatching back and forth between one of the dispatchers and myself, where they some call come in. She showed me the video over my phone of what was going on. So that's what's coming in next gen 911.
So the motion that's on the floor is for purchase. It is for ratification at council next Tuesday night, unless there is will to defer it. So as of right now, the motion stands on the floor. That committee of the whole recommends that council approve the allocation of municipal modernization funding to purchase 16 Bell APX 6000 P25 VHF portable radios via single source procurement. So there's more information.
Through your worship, Director Halliday just showed me that those radios are encrypted. They can be encrypted with they've got the programming to do that. So as the updates come, we can add
Encrypt
that
them.
if we need
Okay.
that.
Would it be possible, and through you, your worship, would it be possible to get a little better understanding from Bell and Motorola as to the service agreements and the ongoing costs of upgrades? Just for next week, would it be possible to bring that to us at council before we approve this?
Through your worship, I can talk, but I don't actually think they know exactly what's all happening with next gen 911 as far as their processes. But I can certainly talk with Bell and see what kind of licensing changes they.
Or even what it costs to upgrade the units now. So it may not give us what it might be in a year from now, but what today's value of upgrading a unit type thing,
Yeah.
or the licensing or what have you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the licensing, how that works.
Yeah. So if we could just ask what the cost is for relicensing going for, like as of today's date. Well, obviously. don't know.
Through your worship, there is no licensing more
Oh.
fees now. This covers all the programming and everything on these radios currently.
It's if
Until
the
they
programming
change, when the
changes.
program changes to next gen 911, which is 2 to 3 years away, then they'll have a better idea what that's going to be.
Perhaps you could have a further conversation offline about the specifics. I don't want to get too much further down into the weeds. I appreciate the
Absolutely.
conversation. But if there's time between now and next council meeting, which is actually next Tuesday instead of next Monday, just as an additional reminder. So I'm going to call the question that's on the floor and see where we go with that. So all those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed? And we're carried. So there's obviously time if there is additional information, Chief, that comes forward, please forward that on to council for further consideration for ratification at council. Next is 5.5 Administration Report SR-046. Actually, is everybody good to keep pressuring on here, or do we need a break? 5 soon. How about I do 5.5 and then I'll let you go. Okay, so 5.5 Administration Report SR-04622, Special Events Policy. The motions moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Maybe. The Committee of the Whole recommends that Council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-021, being a bylaw to regulate and govern special events and establish a permit system for such special events. Are there any questions as the CAO is ready to answer them? Fire away. Councillor Maybe and then Councillor Grow.
Thank you, worship, and through you. As I started reading this, I jotted down parades in the list, and later on I did see that they were listed, but not as explicitly as some of the other events in the first part of it, as well as the Turkey Fair, which is something that I would feel this would fall into too. And then I also put that about the approvals and permits from the different agencies that are also there. And you put that you can find them and that they may be on the website, the township website. My only issue is that, and we've talked about this when we first sat at this table, is that our website is very difficult to navigate. And I know we've talked about that loosely a few times about trying to fix something, but nothing's really happened to it. Whereas you can go to other websites, as I have, and I'm sure Councillor Carell Digger has, and you can find different things a little easier than our own. So I'm wondering whether you might be able to put a link in the application document that's on the document to take them to that, instead of looking it up in our own base, because sometimes you have a list of different avenues that you can get to, right? Might make it simpler for them.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Maybe. That's a great idea. I think what we were envisioning was having a landing page of its own for special events, for the applications and relevant links. So the idea of all of this is to bring some sanity to the chaos right now, but we don't want to have an Easter egg hunt for people. We want to make this as easy as possible. Also, Katie Forrester and her team are going to be working on an application guide. So it'd be a step-by-step, and we'd have all the relevant links in that as embedded as well. So we're going to try to roll this out with and make it as easy as possible for organizations. We don't want it to be a roadblock. We want it to facilitate it, but get some control and get some governance over special events within the township.
Yeah, and just to follow up, and particularly with the scale of why this started. Did you get that? That at least we can get a handle on this. The other one was that it said pony rides. Should it not be animal rides, because it could be a donkey, it could be a camel. So
Sure.
just to put it out there that putting a pony ride is pretty explicit if we're going to go down there. And I do have one other one that's maybe of a little bit more serious note. And I kind of wondered whether this tied into our Airbnb kind of situation where we have cases sometimes where there's an overabundance of population on a particular property. But I know that the city of Kingston just recently passed a nuisance bylaw for the same exact thing for Airbnb. So maybe something to look at in our future. Thank you.
I recognize Councillor Burrell and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, through you, your worship. I was concerned about the bylaw is not intended to apply to the following, and it says events held at host venues and businesses otherwise licensed. So if in Rockport, there's a business that does wedding venue and so on.
Yep.
And so I don't want to put any restrictions on what they do other than what they already have, i.e. if they put a tent up, they get a building permit. But they should not require, in my humble opinion, to get a $50 licensing every time they need to have an event. And they have had a food truck there, and they have had, they don't have a liquor license, so they let the person coming in do so. I don't want to be putting handcuffs on them in any way.
That's not the intent. Oh, excuse me, through you, your worship. That's not the intention of this bylaw at all. The hosted events like the Rockport Barn would be able to continue on with their business as normal. Similarly for the Glen House, who will host wedding receptions and all that sort of stuff. They're professional venues. They have their own sets of requirements that they have to meet legislatively.
Okay.
These are more for the ad hoc events that are happening on township facilities or using township facilities, or are going to be having an impact on township infrastructure.
Okay. Thank
Councillor
you.
Jameson.
Just like to say, first of all, I'm glad we're looking at this and have the opportunity to move forward, because it's a good first step. Some of the impetus for this is not basically things that our residents, our neighbors are doing, our businesses are doing. But some of you will recall that Sealy's Bay in particular and Lyndhurst secondarily found themselves kind of invaded by forces that don't phone, they just show up. 80 boats go in, 80 boats come out. It's been pretty difficult. So first and foremost, we need to ensure that we do things that protect the township assets, whether it's our harbors, and at the point at which Ivy Lee is up to scratch and Rockport's in better shape, we have a bunch of assets that we need to take care of. These are health and safety issues, because during the course of some of the challenges we had up in the two villages in the north, you wouldn't have been able to get a fire truck down Main Street or Mill Street or Bay Street. I mean, it just was not a very good situation. The other thing is that I'm a little more prone to be a little harder on the front end of a negotiation with a group wanting to use township assets. Once again, I'm not talking about private enterprises and other things that exist here. I'm talking about groups that come in, because this is a revenue stream for us, and we certainly need revenue for the facilities that we're building, that we're paying for as residents, that are first and foremost here for our residents. So this is a good first step. I would have been a little tougher on some aspects of it, but I exchanged a couple of emails with the CAO, and I'm confident that this is the first iteration and that it will be improved. But I'd really like to see something in place soon because the summer is coming and the surprise visit can therefore be managed a little bit better with this in place. So I thank the staff for bringing it to us.
Go ahead, CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, Councillor Jameson and I have been corresponding on the special events policy, and there are a couple of little tweaks that I will make to this with respect to cost recovery of staff time, which Councillor Jameson had pointed out to us to make it a little more explicit. Last year for the fishing derbies up in Sealy's Bay, we had a summer student show up when the boats were putting in so early in the morning, and also staying when they were pulling out, just to make sure there weren't any issues and that the organizers knew where the public washrooms were, that they were open for them, and sort of directing traffic. So that sort of cost we want to recoup. It worked out really well, I think. And we'd like to have that going forward for fishing derbies up in Sealy's Bay or anywhere else. So we want to make sure that the bylaw specifically says in part of the cost that we can recover or any staff costs that are associated with it. So I will make a couple of little changes in the policy for next week, and I will speak to them and redline them so people can see what little tweaks I have made to them. But thank you very much for your input, Councillor.
Okay, any further questions for the CAO? I just also wanted to add that I kind of pushed the CAO a little bit on this one in regards to timing, mainly because we're having a peer meeting at the end of this month. And we were hoping to bring that to the peer committee so that everybody is aware with the village people for all the different groups, just so that everybody's aware and we can hopefully get through this spring, summer, fall season all singing from the same song sheet. So I appreciate the work that CAO has done on this to ensure that that's got forward. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? And we're carried. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to let everybody go and have a 5-minute break. So actually, I'll give you 7 minutes. So we'll come back at 7:55, please. Thank you.